For those of you who do not know me, my name is Sebastian Edwards. I am a professor here and the Senior Dean for Global Initiatives. And it gives me great pleasure to welcome you all. And I want to thank Craig Ehrlich for being our guest today and for sharing with us his experience as a great entrepreneur and a man of the world. You've all read Craig's vita, and it's very impressive. He's one of UCLA's great alums, and he has done a lot of good things for the university and continues to do good things and will continue in the future. So those of you who in your previous incarnation have taken creative writing classes will know that the number one lesson is show, don't tell. So, and that means that if you are writing, you, through the story, tell the reader, you show the reader through the story, don't tell about the character. You don't just describe the characters. And this is what we're going to do today. Instead of me introducing Craig with a very long list, which you can read, I will be asking him questions, and you will get to know him this way. So thank you, Craig, for being with us, as I've been trying to get you here for some time. So Craig's bio, if you read it, there are a very large number of companies that he has created and founded. And I've known Craig for quite some time, and he is the chairman of the Center for Global Management's Board of Advisors. And he's been very, very helpful to us. And I always thought that you had never worked for anyone, that you had created your first company when you were like 11. And then gone on and on and on. But now as I was rereading your bio, at the very end I find out that you did work, you were a salaried man once. Tell us about that and how you freed yourself from being a salaried man and became an entrepreneur.
Well, let me correct one thing. My first job was bagging groceries at Vaughn's when I was 6 years old. and then newspaper route at 11. And then at 14, I was washing dishes in a steakhouse and busboy. And then I became the chef in the restaurant.
So, how old were you when you owned the restaurant?
Yeah. Restaurant closed a few years afterwards. But, and then I decided I had to go into politics. So I started working for then Mayor Tom Bradley. At the same time, I entered UCLA. And after 2 years of that, I realized I was crazy. I wasn't being a kid or a teenager. So I decided that I would become a full-time student at UCLA. And a year later, I was student body president. Yeah, well, so I could not control myself.
I want to talk about your year as a president or your time.
I just wanted you to know I started
let's wait about that, because that's one of the questions that I have.
Well, my first, it was actually my second job. I actually worked for two people. I started in the cable TV industry here in the United States at the very early stages. And I worked for a man named Mark Nathanson, who later sold his company that I worked for about $2.7 billion to Paul Allen. But I was there from the very beginning, very entrepreneurial. Mark had started the company himself. And so I was his assistant, and I learned everything about the business.
What year was that?
That was 1981.
And was cable then like a sure thing, and people said, of course?
No.
Or people thought that you guys were, I mean, if you can get TV through the airwaves, laying cables, it's pretty crazy, isn't it?
Exactly right. My first project, if any of you know Monterey Park, in the San Gabriel Valley, which today is primarily Asian, but in those days it was, it had a few areas that needed reception. And in the old days, don't forget, cable TV was created so that you could provide better reception. There was no such thing as ESPN, HBO, CNN, and those types of channels. So I did my first study for him there, and we created the first 54-channel system on the West Coast, and people just thought we were mad because what were you going to do with all these channels? So it was not a given. It was a very big risk at the time. But obviously, looking in hindsight, cable TV industry became very big.
Right. So then you moved to the Hutchison group, or that's the same?
I got recruited.
Okay.
Strangely
so
enough,
how old is young Craig at this point?
About 28, and he thinks he's going to be a politician.
Okay.
Okay? Worked for the mayor, been student body president of UCLA, and I grew up in this area. I'm Jewish. I was liberal. I was a Democrat, and if you know anything about politics,
you had all the labels, man.
I had all the labels, and then I get this call from a consultant of mine. He was working for me, and he said they're looking for somebody to run the largest cable TV system in the world that's about to be built in Hong Kong. Are you interested? And I thought to myself, well, if they're stupid enough to offer me to come out there and interview, I'm going.
So now we have to interrupt. You are 28. You're Jewish.
Yeah.
Raised
we don't have to keep making that.
Yeah. Raised in West LA.
Yes.
California kid.
Yes.
Surfer.
Beach, body surf, but
yeah, okay.
Not a surfer.
And you are recruited from Hong Kong. And then you stay in Asia forever, which we'll get to. Had you until that point thought Asia? If I don't make it as a politician, Asia is where I want to be?
No.
But what did you know about Asia?
I think I was born in a different life. I was Asian.
I see.
I honestly believe that because somehow in high school I started studying Japanese. It was the first time the LA school district was providing Japanese language. So, and I was fascinated with this teacher, Kiriyama-san. Mr. Kiriyama, it was first time, so I took his classes. And I began to study Japanese, and all my friends at my high school tended to be Asian, except the tennis players. And
there's some pretty good Asian tennis
there are
players.
now.
Come on.
There are now. So there was something going on with me, and I did not know what it was.
Had you been to Asia before
No.
you recruited?
No.
Were you dying to go? I mean, we have to remember at that time it was expensive and not that common for people to travel as...
It was very
all
uncommon.
of you guys have traveled. At that time it was unusual. No?
It was very uncommon, but as most of you can imagine, in the 80s, we all thought Japan was the country that would dominate, besides the United States, would dominate the world's economy. And so I thought by learning Japanese, that was going to give me a big step up. Of course, 20 years later, we realized it wasn't Japan, it was another country called China.
Right. We'll get to that. So you go to Hong Kong as a salaried man, and you get there, and this is what year?
I'm hired by the richest man in Hong Kong named Li Ka-shing.
Yeah.
And I actually turned the job down the first time. Because, and I think this might be an interesting little story for those of you who are recruited and you're trying to evaluate the right kind of jobs. At that time, Hutchison Whampoa was the largest company in Hong Kong. It has its roots in with the Brits, but Li Ka-shing is obviously Chinese. And so it was this great combination of Chinese and Western management. I was interested in the company, but the partners were...
The announcement that Hong Kong will be handed back already has been made.
Well known, 1987, right. Not an issue at the time for me to
because
to
it was
think
in
about.
82, if I remember.
84.
84. Yeah,
Margaret Thatcher had signed the deal.
I was there when I watched it on TV in Hong Kong, so it was quite, yeah.
I just thought if I'm going to work for Hutchison, that's a good deal. But the main partner with them was British Telecom, and they were one of the largest telecommunication companies in the world. And they flew me to London from Hong Kong. And the moment I walked into British Telecom, I knew this was not for me. This was a big corporation, full of bureaucracy and cover-your-ass type people. And I somehow, even at 28, I had this ability to see through what was going to happen. So I went back to Los Angeles. I was only gone 5 days. My boss didn't know I was doing any of this. And I turned down the job to go to Hong Kong. And they called me up and they said, why? And I said, because I can smell politics, and I'm a young guy, and this is a startup, and we're talking about $1 billion investment 30 years ago. This was a big deal.
Yeah.
And I just thought that I would get cut up in it. So even though it was a great opportunity, I said, no, I'm not going to do this. And they said, look, you don't understand who we are, which was probably true. You don't understand the man who controls our company, Mr. Lee. And we want you to come out one more time because we control this company. And I thought, okay. So I went back out.
So the Brits had no idea that they didn't control it, huh?
No, they thought they were going to control everything. You know, what would the Chinese people know? But I accepted the job, and it was the greatest decision I ever made.
And okay, so you are now in Hong Kong, 1987, building the largest cable system in the world.
Well, I told them I will not take this job if you don't have the license. And they said they'd have the license in about 6 months. And I was very good at winning licenses here in America. But I said
because you were a politician.
Well, because the nature of cable TV is you win a license from the city. So there was marketing, politics, people, you know, building coalitions. So I was good at that. But I did not want to go to Hong Kong and do that. 6 months, they said, no problem. Build your team. Well, 2 years later, we finally won the license. It was an exciting and incredible time to be in Hong Kong because many of my friends who were Chinese, they really felt so, they were so upset with China, even though they're Chinese themselves.
Right.
They could not believe what was happening. They were ready to go fight Beijing. Because Hong Kong at that time, of course, was very separate from China, and the feelings were very different. So the true story is that Li Ka-shing, the richest man in Hong Kong, lost confidence in Hong Kong. Not a story well known, but we were negotiating the final deal of our contract with the government of Hong Kong, and we're sitting across the table from the chief secretary, and my boss is sitting there, and they're best friends socially, and they wanted us to do more. What a mistake in negotiation, because had they simply said, are you going to commit to this proposal, $1 billion investment? Mr. Lee was a man of pride, and he told us, I'll do it, but if they ask for more, nothing. And we walked away from the negotiations, and the dream of my life fell apart.
Is that when you decided to start your own company?
No. One more great story is, out of that, I created with others something called a superstation. So we had this cable TV project. We're going to create all this Chinese programming in Hong Kong. We're going to beam it up on a satellite, a la Ted Turner. This is, again, 30 years ago. Nobody was doing this. And we were going to cover all of Asia with Chinese programming.
Through a satellite?
Through a satellite, which our company had owned, called AsiaSat.
Who had put the satellite up?
We had, with Cable and Wireless and CITIC, a Chinese organization. So we had the satellite, we had the superstation idea, and the son of Mr. Lee, Richard Lee, the youngest son, came back, migrated back from Canada where he'd gone to school, and he said, I want to do that project. So I got pulled into that, and we created something called Star TV. So if any of you know Asia, Star TV, those of you who are from India, you'll know Star TV. It's a big, big deal. Well, we started that out of a proposal that I had. And Rupert Murdoch bought that company 5 years later for, I think, $400 million. And the investment by Hutchison was probably $50 million. So it was a brilliant deal, but Murdoch has a fantastic asset.
Yeah, as the French say, pas mal, not bad.
Timing is everything.
Yeah.
So
let me ask you a question. So here, I'm not going to repeat what I said before about your background, but politics, I want to say that. UCLA, the beach.
Don't overplay that one.
Okay. And you end up in the cable telecommunication. Was that something that, because you were not an engineer undergrad.
No.
The technical part was not something that you were always intrigued by, and no. Okay.
No, I would probably intrigued by marketing.
Marketing.
Because politics is about marketing ideas,
Right.
and in some cases marketing yourself or a politician. But in its purest sense, using politics in a very positive way. It's selling ideas, it's selling issues.
So you have the Star TV system, and now you say, now I want to be on my own?
Well, Richard asked me to be president of Star TV, and then 3 months later, he decided he was going to be president.
Yeah, well, that happens all the time.
And when you're the son of a billionaire,
you do almost what you want.
You do. And it gave me a signal that maybe I should move back into the telecoms division of Hutchison.
Or that your dad
My dad wasn't a billionaire.
Should have been a billionaire.
Yeah, no. He was in the garment industry, so he wasn't that rich. So I decided to go back into the Hutchison telecom area, and we started mobile phone business. And for those of you who, it's again before some of your time, but there was a company we created called Orange, which became the most successful mobile phone company in England. And at that point, I left Hutchison. And at that point, I decided I wanted to be an entrepreneur.
Okay, so you leave with lots of stock options that you cash in? Or?
No stock. No.
So
I had studied, the key thing here, Sebastian, was I had studied under an entrepreneur who built a cable TV company here. I studied under Li Ka-shing, although I can't say I dealt with him daily, but I watched him, I went to meetings once a month with him. But the company was very entrepreneurial, very untraditional, very large Chinese, British company. But it was a big bureaucracy, big company.
And so you leave and you have to raise capital, you have your own... you don't have to give us figures. But
I start to raise a little capital because I knew with Star TV, the cable TV industry was going to mushroom throughout Asia. And I wanted to be in the forefront of that.
Okay.
So I built the first cable TV system in the Philippines with a partner. So we raised the money, and we started a paging company in Mexico, and paging was very big at that time, still. But a terrible partner in Mexico, so I got out.
So okay, now we're getting to something that I wanted to touch on. Partners.
Yes.
You've spent most of your career internationally. How important, you already said it when you said terrible partner in Mexico and a good partner in the Philippines. How important is to find the right partner, and what should you look at besides looking them in the eyes?
Sebastian, you've hit on a point. Whenever I talk to groups, I usually ask a question, but now you guys already know the answer. The question I usually ask is, what do you think is the most important thing when you start a company? And people raise their hand, and after about 5 suggestions, which are all very valid, nobody ever gives me the answer I'm looking for. And it's finding the right partner. And it's the hardest thing you can do in any business. If you're in a startup in particular, you're likely going to get certain things wrong. And so if you've got the right partner, you're going to figure a way through this. So if you've got the wrong technology, or if you've got the wrong business model, or you haven't raised enough money, you've gone through your money, how are you going to come back? And if you've got the right partner and you guys think alike, you can fix things.
Yeah, so this is very interesting to me. So I'm beginning to think from what you're saying that the partner, the main advantage is that he or she will be a sounding board, someone you can sort of exchange. But on the other hand, I thought before you said this that maybe the partner importance was that he or she would help you navigate the local politics and cultural issues.
Well, I hadn't gotten there yet.
Okay.
I agree with the first thing you said. You ought to be looking at partners who add value. It's amazing how many people, when they go on boards, they don't look for value add. They have some other agenda. So you need somebody, we all have our strengths and weaknesses. This is such an obvious statement, but you'd be shocked at how often people don't consider this. You need to find people who will strengthen your own weaknesses. It's important that you know your own strengths and weaknesses. But if you go to the companies that I've started, which I think is the point you want me to make, is if it's in the Philippines, if it's in India, if it's in Hong Kong or Taiwan, you better have the right partners. And I don't mean you have to have the best connected partner, because we don't all start large companies. Most of the companies we start are small. But you need people who understand the regulatory policies of that country or that city. You need to know people who can smell politics. You know, people run away from politics, but as business people, it's one of the most important things that business people don't look at enough. You know, regulation, it's a given, yeah, you need to know whether you can do this or not do this. But policy impacts the kind of investments you guys are going to make, either on behalf of your boss or if you're entrepreneurial. So it's incredibly important you find the right partner, and it's the hardest thing to do.
Where did you actually raise the initial funds for the Philippine cable deal?
Well, it's a great case study what I did, because it was high risk. In the Philippines, even to this day, foreigners cannot invest in the media or it cannot invest in publishing, broadcasting, all those kinds of things. And at that time, there were no cable TV regulations, so they lumped it in with broadcasting. So somehow, as a foreigner, I had to figure out a way around that. To make a long story short, there was a way that you could provide debt that had all the feel and smell of equity, but you actually had no voting power, which really meant finding the right partner is incredibly important, because you're really, and a good lawyer, absolutely. So there's a huge amount of trust in a case like this. So it was my first deal. It all worked successfully, and I brought in one other international investor, and he was the one that was the trouble. And so I sold out a few years earlier than I wanted to, all because he was creating problems, not because of the Filipino partner.
Interesting. Yes, please.
My first question is, when you're in a new place, how do you find out about the politics of that place? And my second question is, how do you see Chinese and American relationships in the future, or politics? And
Okay, remind me of the second one. Let
Okay.
me focus first. Well, you certainly don't do it by going in for a week and thinking you know the country. I mean, it really takes an intensive amount of effort. In the old days, I would read 5 to 6 newspapers every single day from that country. Obviously, if it was in a language I could read. In Hong Kong, that was okay. In the Philippines, India was okay. It was not in Taiwan. So I had to learn other ways. You had to find people that you trust, that could give you their views. You've got to meet with everybody you can. You've got to read everything you can, but you don't have to believe everybody you talk to. You have to have some innate sense of what's a risk, what's not, how much risk you're going to take, and the kind of people you're going to associate with. So those are the kinds of things that I would strongly recommend. Don't go into a country on your own thinking you're going to learn it in a short period of time. It's going to be a recipe for disaster.
So let me ask you, follow up on this question. You say you have to be careful in choosing the people you associate with. There are two ways, at least, to interpret that. One is that you want someone you get along with and maybe think things alike. The other one is to find a complement, someone who in general, you like baseball, he likes soccer, you like cartoons, he likes drama, and complements. Is there a rule? Is there?
Baseball and soccer would not be my 2 top priorities in discussions with a partner. I know you're teasing me. What exit strategies do they have? How do they run their personal financial life? How do they treat their family? What are the other jobs that they've held? What are the other businesses that they've been in? You look at a track record, and and particularly you look at people who've had difficulties and challenges, because when everything goes well, you can't really judge what's going to happen with your partner when things don't go well. Kind of logical, right? It seems obvious. But you'd be surprised how many people don't do that. I mean, I deal with venture capitalists, I deal with private equity guys. I'm on both sides, I'm watching this, and I'm thinking, they really do not get, they'll do due diligence, they'll look at the balance sheet and the P&L, and they'll talk to you about all these different things that are scaring the crap out of them, but they don't really get to know the people. They don't get to know the management team, they don't know what they've been through, they don't know the other partners, and that always has surprised me. So
It's a second question.
I hope that's, Now, the second question is China-U.S. relations.
Yeah, in the future.
We could talk for hours, but I'll try and be succinct. China is an incredibly competitive, on a world stage, country. Its ambitions are global. It has the same ambitions America had for the last 100 years. And that threatens a lot of people. And that makes them nervous. But if you put that context that most major powers have that same interest, we shouldn't be scared by it. We should be challenged by it. We being, if we're an American, we should be challenged by it, and we have to step up.
So now I'm going to ask you the sort of challenging, difficult question. I'm just trying to be bad. So we've heard this story before, except take every time we say China now, put Japan, and the bubble, the fear, it just disintegrated on its own. Aren't we going through, why aren't we going through that process?
Well, I think
why China is different from what we were afraid of in the 1980s and 70s?
First of all, the relationship with the United States and Japan has always been different since World War II. We have been friendly. The relationship we have with China, we don't have that same influence, is really what I'm trying to get at. So
if we try the VERs, they would say...
It won't work. They'll say, piss off.
Right.
Yes, they'll say
in another language.
In another language. So I view them as competitors, but competitors in any of our businesses make us work harder, make us work smarter. So the fact that China has got all this going for them, you know, if you look at Baidu and Tencent and all the tech firms, and they're now all in AI, you know, it's a global economy. Despite Trump, you know, it's still going to be a global economy.
So you can assure me that China is for real, and it's not we will not see what happened with Japan, that we were scared and we didn't have to do anything. It disinflated in a way on its own.
China is real. China will make a lot of mistakes. China, as you can see, coming into Hollywood, Wanda has come into Hollywood, and now the Chinese Communist Party is not very interested in that, so all of a sudden they're being pulled back. So their policies will impact certain private sector deals that they do. During the Japanese time, they bought every hotel, they bought everything, and the Americans bought it back 50 cents on the dollar within 10 years. And I thought about that a few years ago. I thought, is this going to happen with the Chinese? I don't think it's going to happen. I think the Chinese are much more professional, if I can use that, more sophisticated than the Japanese were buying trophies. And some of the Chinese entrepreneurs are doing the same, but I think as a wholesale, they're not.
Do you think that the Communist Party, for now, this is a difficult question, is helping China?
I don't sit here as a proponent of the Chinese political structure. I have many friends who are Chinese Communist Party members, but they're business people. And it's a pragmatic decision that they make. It is not that they actually believe in communism. And you guys are all sophisticated here. You know the party's called the Chinese Communist Party, but they're not communists anymore. It's a centralized economy, not completely different than Singapore or some of the others. It's a one-party system. And the communist leadership, the Chinese leadership, will do anything to remain in power. So you must keep that in mind. They're doing all kinds of things to clean up state enterprises. They've been doing it for 10 or 15 years. They're continuing to do it. They do have a lot of muscle. But let me make clear, China is not going to go like this. China, like all countries, it's going to have its ups and downs. When that's going to happen, I'm not an expert. But I would say sooner than later.
Yes?
I'm curious to maybe, because there's a follow-up question as you just mentioned, what are some of the lessons you learned in the past, seeing for the economy, either its growth or ups and downs, some of the driving forces behind the downside, and some of the lessons you've learned in the past that would be sharing with us and give us a context that how we can view the economy in the long term and get us prepared.
Are you referring to China or everywhere?
I think maybe we can continue the the discussions on China, and if you have some thoughts on Japan, that could be great as well, because Japan has gone through some of that. Yeah.
Well, it's a good question. I may have some difficulties answering it. I'm trying to be as responsive to all of you and the kinds of decisions you're having to make at your stage in life. I think that weakness in economies, if you have the right kind of attitude, is actually something, if you're entrepreneurial, you can take advantage of. So I don't think it's a scary time. But if you're looking for a corporate job, then downturns can be very challenging for you. The consultancies aren't hiring, the banks aren't hiring, so that becomes a real challenge. But if you're multilingual, meaning you speak English and Chinese, or English and French, or English and German, or whatever, or Spanish, these give you advantages that you can ride the waves as they go up and down. So as it relates specifically to China, do you want me to? I can get a few specifics. If I were in China today, or if I was going to stay in California as a Chinese person, tourism, massive. There are massive opportunities between California and China. Healthcare, massive. Banking, massive. And tech is the obvious one. There's so much growth in these areas, whether you want to say domestically in China, or you want to take advantage of the network of people that you've built here in California. California has such an advantage over the rest of the United States as it relates to Asia, because we have this incredible natural resource state. When you're sitting in India and you are overwhelmed by pollution, or you're sitting in China, or you're sitting in many of these Asian countries, the lifestyle's not very good. You may be making a lot of money, but raising your children, or, all of a sudden you wake up in California to blue skies. We have our challenges here, but the food, the opportunities, the culture.
The university.
UCLA, of course. Is incredible. And I'm saying that as a person who has spent 30 years living in Hong Kong, where it's polluted and crowded. Lovely food. Love my Cantonese food. But I now wake up most of the time in my Santa Monica home, look up, blue sky, and it really is a rare opportunity. So I'm not suggesting don't go back to India or China or wherever you're from, or if you're an American and you want to go overseas, go. But recognize that there's some trade-offs, and recognize that there's some opportunities for you to take advantage of, because everybody wants to come to California, whether it's for vacation or they want to buy real estate here. There are so many opportunities.
Okay, so succession in medium and small-sized companies. Medium-sized companies in China can have 500 to 1,000 employees. After the one-child policy, these families now have one child, and if there were siblings at the top, there are 3 children. Many of those children, the one child, is here in this room.
Yeah, the empresses and emperors.
And
yes.
they don't want to go back to China. They want to stay here or go to England or France and work in Canada. What's going to happen with all these companies? The dad is getting old, the mother moved to Vancouver, and the heirs or heiresses are here.
You're talking about the entrepreneurial companies in China and Hong Kong and
that's
Taiwan.
what I'm talking about.
Their families, they'll go back.
They go back?
They go back.
You guys are going to go back?
They spend years here, but they go back because the father, mother leans on them to go back. And the opportunity in many of these companies are so great. But what they bring is the Western knowledge and the Western contacts, which will strengthen their company in Asia. I don't want to get so fixated just on China, because whether it's Filipino, Vietnamese, Singaporean families.
The main difference is that they didn't have the one.
They don't, but it goes to the heart of these smallish, family-oriented companies.
Right.
But the second, third generation kids have such an advantage, and the opportunities tend to be so great.
So you think that they will
many
go
of them
back?
go back.
Okay,
many
great.
of them go back.
So let me ask you a different question, related also to what you were saying. Our colleague Joe Barragan, who is at the board, And he used to be one of the managing directors, one of the largest investment banks in Geneva. And one of the things that he's been telling us for a long time is that it is difficult to get Anderson graduates to be willing to take jobs internationally. And I don't know if that has changed through the years. What would you advise this group of amazing people here if they have two offers that are very comparable, one, say, in Detroit or, I don't know, Denver, and another one, not LA, which is, of course, tops, right? And the other one abroad. You went away. You left. And,
I left.
And you came back 30 years later, a rich and famous man. What would you tell these people if they have comparable offers, one from, say, working in Lisbon or in the Philippines, wherever it is, and would you tell them, go east, go west, young woman, young man, or?
I got an answer.
Okay.
But I got to know everything about you. Like, I know about Lily.
Okay.
I know this woman she goes to UCLA as an undergraduate, and she lives in my house because she's a tutor for my daughter who speaks Chinese. And I know everything about Lily. And I've told Lily, what do you want to do, Lily, when you graduate? And I wanted to be an accountant. My parents think I should be an accountant. No way are you going to be an accountant. Do accounting classes, but we need to know everything about Lily. We need to know her ambitions. So my point is that you need to know what you want to do. You need to know your strengths and weaknesses. You need to know whether you want to be, I love this one, and I truly live this one. Do you want to be a small fish in a big pond, or a big fish in a small pond? I mean, and there's even a third option. You can be a big fish in a big pond.
That's what you became.
But that's not everybody. No, I consider myself to have been a big fish in a small pond. That's kind of what I thought was happening in Hong Kong. What I did not realize is Hong Kong is a city of 7 million people, but it fights way above its weight. I didn't realize how international and how big and influential Hong Kong turned out to be. So I was wrong, but in a good way. So I think those are things you have to ask yourself. I have some of my scholars who are here. They're undergraduate scholars in memory of my mother, and they've heard me say this a million times, and I say it no matter what age you are. It's called the mirror test. You have to look in the mirror at yourself and say, what do I do really well, and what do I not do so well? What do I like to do, and what do I not particularly like to do? I've done that test on myself for years and years. I sit on the audit committee of a $20 billion company in India. I've been on it for 8 years. But I got to tell you, I don't like audit. I don't like finance. It's
awful,
not my
man.
strength. I taught myself how to do it. I taught myself how to read a balance sheet and a P&L and figure out all this. I've been a CEO of a company. I've been chairman of companies. So you kind of force yourself. But if I do the mirror test, I say, that's not what I love to do, so don't put yourself in that position. Sometimes you have to do it for a few years to get ahead, but when you're kind of moving up into different jobs, try and find the things that you do best and place yourself in that position. Again, pretty logical what I'm saying, but you'd be surprised how people don't think that way. Put yourself in a position to succeed.
Okay, more questions from the audience. Yes, sir.
My personal experience, I tend to over-focus on what I like to do and decide, entrepreneurship, corporate job, and sort of balance that out. And it seems that in your case, you said development. Maybe you weren't sure that you wanted to go into, broadcasting or entertainment. And you sort of discovered that as you moved on, and then opportunities were easier to visualize from where you were.
Correct.
Can you give some advice on, if you were standing where we are today, how to navigate those waters?
Well, again, a little thing that I talk to the scholars about and others, I view each of us as a brand. And life, maybe when you get to your 50s, 60s, you can stop worrying so much about the brand. But I think when you're teens, 20s, 30s, you ought to be focused on building your brand. And you can do that in many ways. For example, you speak at least 2 languages. I know that. Now, most Europeans speak 3 languages. Most people in Asia speak 3 languages, or at least 2 dialects and a 3rd language. So those are ways of building the brand. Getting international experience is building the brand. Having different positions, doing different internships. Many of you are quite sophisticated people, so you may be above that. Maybe if you're in a corporation, it's volunteering to do something that you're not super comfortable in, but you know that once you've finished it, you're going to end up having built your CV, your resume. It's not so much building a resume, though. I don't mean literally a resume, but it's building a set of experiences so that when opportunities come up and the boss says, well, who can go to China? Who speaks Chinese? I mean, I always tell the young ones when they're ethnically Chinese, I mean, do you guys speak Mandarin? Well, not really. You know, how can you not speak Chinese, or how can you not speak, whatever the language is that their parents are from? So these are things to continuously build your brand. I'd have to, again, it's a very individual answer. It's hard to make it a generic one for everyone.
As I said earlier, I've known Craig for a number of years, but you get to discover new things in this process of interviewing him. And I really like what you're saying, which is you can give some general advice, but it really comes to knowing who you want to advise, and one size does not fit all. And I think that's very, very important. And I hadn't heard you say that
People
before.
don't make that, when they're speaking or answering questions, I think people don't make that distinction enough. And I have an obligation to make that distinction for you, because I can give you some general responses, but until I know you, I can't really give you the best.
So are you going to give everyone your email address so that you can get to know everyone here? Okay, more questions.
I was hoping to hear a little bit more about your experiences in the Philippines. I imagine you experienced at least some degree of local corruption while you were trying to build this.
A lot of traffic.
Build this enterprise over there, and I was wondering if you could give us a few of your thoughts on how you can, if not partnership, then at least try to reduce the impediment that the local government causes, and as you try to build out your businesses, how do you build that sort of coalition with the local regulatory body as you spur this growth?
Again, generalized responses to this second half. I think when you're in the United States and you're dealing with, let's say, a city council or county board of supervisors, you can build coalitions, you can write position papers, you can lobby them, you can hire lobbyists, things that might impact your business. Much harder to do when you go to the Philippines or you go to Vietnam, because their systems are quite different. You need to make the arguments in those countries, but they work under a different set of standards. That is why you need local partners, because they're the ones who are going to figure that out. In the Philippines, like Indonesia, like China, like many countries in Latin America, there is significant elements of corruption. It is part of business. And I think if you're an American, it shows you how removed I am from being an American. There's a Foreign Corrupt Practices Act. Does that still exist?
It exists.
I remember thinking about it when I first moved to Hong Kong. Then I forgot about it, never had to worry about it in my own mind. And it's primarily, and this will sound so Pollyannish, if you know what that word means, so apple pie. But I know my own ethics, and I know my own morality, and I wasn't Lockheed, and I'm not bribing people in Korea like they were doing 30, 40 years ago. I don't represent an American company. There were a lot of things that were different about me, but I also knew my own ethics. Having said that, I'm not naive. If you're going to go to these foreign countries, you're going to have to figure out how to get through corruption. I've mentioned to you that I sit on the board of the largest, mobile phone company in India. We also are in Africa. We have 16 countries in Africa. My newest company is Mobile Electricity, and our number one market is Nigeria. Well, talk about corruption, in African countries. They make the Philippines look, not corrupt. But you have to have local management and local partners, and you have to do what's right.
Yes.
On the flip side of that, I'm curious to know, after you've been working in so many different environments, what is part of the business narrative in different cultures that you think is valuable for us to take away, given that we're exposed to sort of a certain idea of what business and success is? What are things you've learned from the other places that you've worked?
Help me a little bit more.
I mean, I've worked in, or done some work in China too, and I feel like it's a lot more collaborative. There's a lot more of a focus on the team. And I think like for here, you know, we have a lot of emphasis on leadership, which is really great, but it kind of changes the prism through which you kind of navigate your own career. And I can imagine that there are different sort of unspoken rules in different places that might be valuable to think about, especially if we don't actually see them on a daily basis.
Well, I think you've almost answered the question. You're spot on. And I'd use the word cultures. There are so many different business cultures in these countries, and you have to identify with them, but you also have to figure out how you fit into them. They're not going to change for you. So you're going to have to decide how flexible you are, whether you are part of a McKinsey team that's sent somewhere and it's dealing with McKinsey Chinese people and you're the token French person or American person to come in. You know, you're there to bring your own set of experiences. You're not there to change them. So if your impression is that China is more collaborative, I'd dispute that a little bit. I wouldn't dispute that's your feeling, and that's what you saw, but I think as a generalization, it's probably not so accurate. I would say if you're entrepreneurial, it doesn't matter what culture you're in, entrepreneurs just think differently. And when they have to collaborate, it's difficult. And this goes back to when you're an entrepreneur, you better pick your partner very carefully, because that is the one or two people that you're going to have to collaborate with on a constant basis. And when shit hits the fan, which it does in any company, it's how people pull together. How do they look at solving problems? Do they panic? Do they get emotional? Or is it all about, okay, shit hit the fan, but we got to think, how are we going to get through this? How are we going to be constructive about it? What values do we bring to this? That's the toughest thing. And you have to know your own culture when you put yourself into another one. Because you may find out that some of them are just not for you and walk away from that. All of us cannot be all things to everybody and every situation. It goes back to the mirror test. You know, you got to know your strengths. You got to know your experiences. Of course, if you're in your 20s and 30s, you're growing. You're learning a lot. I'm still learning things, of course. But I kind of know what I'm good at. I kind of now can read certain cultures and know which ones I'm going to be comfortable in, where I can contribute, where I have a chance to make money. And also, you can't do everything. You can't go to every country and be successful. You got to pick the countries that maybe you fit in best based upon your own background or personality.
So based upon what you just said, you mentioned a lot of times you made decisions and choices, and that seemed to be very important to make you who you are and where you are at today. So back to the point where you started your business in the Philippines. So I was wondering, what was your mentality when you decided to start your business in the Philippines rather than instead of starting a business in the US or somewhere else? Did you like smell something? Yeah,
She's
I
heard
know.
me say that word.
Yeah.
Well, the Philippines was easy for me because I was living in Hong Kong. I was committed to Asia. And this is where I was opportunistic. And I think there's nothing wrong with being opportunistic. You'll hear a lot of the professors and others in your corporations you might be involved in, be strategic. Yes, be strategic, but be opportunistic too. So when I started Star TV, I realized that the Philippines was going to be one of the best markets for cable TV. So I got to know the country better.
What made you think that it was going to be? So help me here, how many people live in the Philippines?
Well, today 105 million.
Okay, how many in
In
Indonesia?
those days, probably, Indonesia,
I'm comparing.
250
Okay,
million.
why did you pick, this is my question, why did you think that the Philippines was more appealing?
Because
You smelled it, but why did you
I
smell
smelled
it?
it because they spoke English to a great extent, those who own TVs and watch television programming, and Star TV was all about television. And all we had
So
at that
the
time was
language,
English.
the language was part of the smelling.
was language.
That it was the Philippines and not Indonesia with twice as many people
Correct.
and around the same income per capita.
Probably, yes.
Yes.
That's correct. And I think people know the story. The Philippines and America share a lot of common cultures, common language. A lot of the business people were educated in the U.S. So there was something I could glom onto that I began to become an expert on. And I could also, I was comfortable in checking people. Like, were you the right partner? But I could go talk to this person because they knew, no, stay away from her. She's
Are you
corrupt.
a member of the Manila Polo Club?
Yes?
Yes.
Why?
Okay, that's where you meet all these people, right?
No, that's just where I play tennis.
Aha!
So you mentioned technology as one of the areas of greatest opportunity between the U.S. and China. China is notoriously a very difficult market for U.S. technology firms. So I'm curious if there are any big American technology firms right now that you think are doing interesting work in China, or what are the greatest areas for opportunity for American tech firms within China?
Good question. Tough times right now. I think primarily you have a confluence of politics on both sides. You have Mr. Trump and many of the people that he represents, which is a dwindling group of people, but a very hard group of people who fear China completely. It's irrational. So cybersecurity becomes a bigger issue. Huawei's deal to sell handsets with AT&T, is there really a backdoor in the handsets of Huawei? Don't think so. But you can play on that fear. And China, of course, is building up its own large companies. So it's kind of pushing off some of the US companies. So I think the confluence of domestic politics on both sides, the timing is probably a bit bad right now for the larger companies. But I think if you're talking about smaller companies, smaller tech companies, you tend to be able to go under the radar screen. And I think there are still opportunities within China for products, as well as Chinese bringing into the US. There's just you have to be a bit smarter right now and smell the politics and stay away from that. So I think the Qualcomms of the world, the Intels of the world are having a more difficult time. So if I was going to try and get a job there because I think, they're so great, it's just a difficult time for them. But if I'm doing a smallish company, I wouldn't shy away. I'd go for that.
When did you figure out what your brand was? What would you say it is, and how has it evolved over time?
Well, it's still evolving, but it's probably stabilizing more than at any time in my life, because you get to a point where you're not as aggressive in building your brand. So I kind of think I am what I am, and it's not going to change. To describe one's own brand sounds too narcissistic, so I have a hard time doing that. I think the only thing I'll say is what you see today right here is who I am.
That was a great answer.
So if you like it, wonderful. And if you think I'm full of shit, well,
We'll never think that.
I mean, they've seen me before. They can tell you whether I'm,
So I want to go back to your very early years when you were student body president at UCLA. Were you a member of the trustees of the University of California? Or because there's one...
No, I missed that year. It rotates between Berkeley and UCLA,
Right,
so I never got to be a regent.
You didn't get to go to...
I didn't get to go be a regent.
a
I
regent.
lobbied the regent.
You lobbied, but you didn't get... Okay.
No.
So UCLA and Berkeley, so the two flagship universities of the UC system, are known historically as having been very active in terms of the political view of the students. And we can think of Bill Walton camping out, protesting against the Vietnam War. There was a war in Vietnam, by the way. We can think of Angela Davis. We had lunch with Chuck Young not too long ago, and he told us the whole. When you were student body president, it had dwindled. But how was it being? What were the things that you were lobbying about? What were the concerns of the students at that time?
Greatest year of my life. It's like being the mayor of a small city. You have staff. I was able to ban smoking. Sorry to all you smokers. I banned smoking on all the facilities. The Wooden Center I got built because it was defeated the year before me. And I went to the then chancellor and said, get out of my way. I'm going to use you as the bad guy. And he said, okay, okay. And I renegotiated a few small pieces. But it was just the psychology of it, where the students were going to get the Wooden Center because we wanted it, not because you wanted it. So I would say the smoking, the banning of fluorocarbons, which was a big deal, and during my time, it was the end of the apartheid era and investments. The regents were investing. It's kind of full circle now because I sit on the board, on the executive committee now of the board of the UCLA Foundation. And we're responsible for the billions of dollars that are in the endowment for UCLA. The regents don't manage our money anymore. We actually manage it.
They would love to.
I know, and we have to be
Keep
careful.
them away.
We just got that to our own 5-6 years ago. In fact, Lily's doing an internship with the UCLA Investment Company. And it's off campus, so the students don't know where it is. And it's a very professionally run management company where they decide, and a lot of the money is going into international equities. And so, I meet with the CEO, and so it's very exciting. So, but I had nothing to do with setting that up. But I'm now kind of full circle, so I'm back involved, and of course with the center.
Yeah,
so I'm staying active.
We'll get to the center. So
where are you going with this?
No. I'm trying. I have the impression students are less and less involved, and you were worried about apartheid and companies divesting from South Africa. And before that, I named Bill Walton, the great basketball player, and it seems that now there's less collaboration, more individualistic. The last big movement here on campus was when the students were against using animals in the labs, which may not have been a good idea. I don't know. Do you have a sense that students are now less involved in big social causes than before, or maybe you
well,
don't
I can't, I'm not an expert. I spend a lot of time on campus because of different things that I do on campus, and I spend a lot of time, I have 53 scholars, some of them, and some have gone through Anderson, some are doctors, and some are married with kids, but I get a new batch, from 18 to 21, a couple of them are sitting here, and in a way, they're my eyes and ears to what students are thinking about. They're extraordinary. They're all ladies, by the way. They're extraordinary women. But I will say that having lived in Hong Kong for 30 years, America has changed tremendously. So I can't talk so much about UCLA. I see a tremendous change in the culture, which I don't find positive. And it's what worries me because the rest of the world is running like this, and the rest of the world wants a car in the garage, they want the best refrigerators, they want to travel around the world. They want what, as I was growing up, what Americans had and aspired to. And all these other people aspire to it now too. And many of them, like in China or India, and parts of Latin America, they're finding it, they're getting it. And that in and of itself is not scary. What's scary is Americans have to understand they're being challenged and they have to be up to the challenge. And I'm not sure we are, and I think most of Mr. Trump's policies are contrary to that. So even if Mr. Trump is right about certain things about America first, well, the way to make America first is to allow the best and the brightest to be part of America. Because this goes back to California. Once they're here, they don't want to go home.
Right.
And that's how you build a much greater America and a much greater California. I think he's got it dead wrong. I understand the people who are behind him. They're the people who lost out under Mr. Obama and Mr. Bush and all the others, and we overlooked them. All of us did. in Indiana and Kentucky, and most of them are white, and you can go through all the psychology. But they feel left behind. You've got to take care of those people. But on the other hand, you don't need to do what Trump's doing. Right. He's walking away from everything America has.
Okay, so let me finish with
too much politics.
No. This is good. Sorry. Let me finish with Lily and the other scholars. So you've mentioned them many times, and the only thing I wrote in my pink pen here. The only question that I had before coming here is this one. I don't know if you can read.
I don't use glasses to read. This one?
Philanthropy.
Yeah. Philanthropy.
So I'm going to ask you now about that. So,
yeah.
As I said earlier on, Craig has been a great donor and a great help to the university in general. And he sits in our board. He's the chairman of the board of the Center for Global Management, very active at Anderson and at the university level. And there is, when we talk about culture and different cultures, one of the cultural things that sets the US apart from the rest of the world is this sense of giving back to society, philanthropy, which we don't see in other parts of the world. And I come from Latin America, and it's a part of the world that doesn't have this philanthropic bent. As all of our friends here in the room are starting their careers, should this be something that they start thinking about early on? At what age did you start thinking that, I mean, you have had 50-some scholars in memory and honor of your mother.
My mother, yeah.
And you helped them through UCLA. They're all women, young women. I mean, you've done, I mean, I don't want to make you, put you in a difficult, but you've done amazing things. How early should people, all of these people here are going to be very successful, start thinking about a plan to give back to the rest of the world?
Well, a couple of things. Thank you for bringing that up. Philanthropy, surprisingly, is not that well accepted in most parts of the world. I was at the University of, trying to remember, I apologize, it's in the UK, and it was a significant university. And I was sitting next to the president of the university. He knew UCLA very well. And you know how much they raised there? $4 million a year. They don't raise money in England. The universities do not raise. It's not part of the DNA.
It's considered to be in bad taste.
Yes. And so I thought to myself, my God, one of the oldest countries in the world, these universities are 300-400 years old, and they're not raising money. And it just, you know, my experience was in Asia where nobody raises money, but I was shocked at the UK. So you come back to America, and here's where I'm gonna give a little pitch. Almost everybody here, you're a graduate student. Many of you have started your careers, maybe taken some time off, or you're fully employed and you're doing this to get ahead. And I get all that, and probably most of you did not do undergraduate work at UCLA. So I know I'm challenged with this, but this is one of the most important universities in America. And it's certainly one of two most important universities in California. And if you care about California or you care about your community, you ought to be giving back to this, whether it's Anderson, whether it's Graduate School of Education, whether it's whatever, you ought to be thinking about that. Now, I understand everybody doesn't have lots of bread to start paying early on, but you'll be surprised how it adds up over time. Again, everybody's an individual. For me, because of my political background, because of the things that I went through as a young person, I made a decision that I was always going to give back. It's just who I am as a person. And so if you have any part of that in you, find what really intrigues you. Find out where you get, you're allowed to enjoy whatever you decide to give money to. You know, it doesn't have to be, oh God, I got to give it to, you know, this terrible disease. I mean, if there's something that you think you get excited by because your mom or your dad or your family or something that you're passionate about, even if it's $100 a month, $50 a month, start thinking about it. But this university has made more impact on the economics of individuals who've gone here than any university in America. It was recently cited because so many of the students undergraduate are from first-time,
Yeah.
first time in their family to go to a university. You guys know, undergraduate, we're the hardest university in America to get into 7 years in a row. So that's a very, one can feel proud. Even if you didn't go here undergraduate, you can feel proud that you're getting your graduate degree from such an incredible research university. But give some money to your local university wherever you went, but if it's private and if it's Harvard or Yale, screw it, they don't need your money. I mean, I see all these Asians giving $100 million to Harvard and Yale. What is that about? Putting their name on a building? That's all that's about. We really need the money here.
And we have lots of buildings without names.
You will never see the Craig Ehrlich bathroom or toilet or chair at Poly Pavilion. You will see scholars. And that's my legacy.
On that note, let's thank Craig for his generosity.